In this video, we will show you how to replace your front brake caliper on this Toyota Sienna. You'll have one of these on each side of your vehicle, and the process is the same. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheels are off the ground. Once you've done that, continue on to removing all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that we have the wheel out of the way, we have a clear view of our front caliper. The first thing we'll do here is use a small pry bar. Your caliper has 2 pistons. We have to try to push them back just enough that we can remove the caliper from the area without too much resistance. To do that, I'll just make my way inside of each of these ports, gently pry up against the rotor. Once again, we don't need to go very far here. Once you do have movement from there, make your way to your bleeder screw. Typically this is going to be covered by a rubber cover. We'll just pop that right out of the way. This one's in very poor condition, but we're replacing it anyway. Use an 8mm to open up the bleeder screw. Wait until you see a steady trickle of fluid, and then close it off. When doing this, since there's going to be fluid coming out, you want to make sure you at least have a collection bucket under this area. Or you can have a collection receptacle like this right here. I'm going to hang this. We'll open up our bleeder screw. You can see a little bit of fluid coming out there. Install this receptacle. I can see the fluid coming down the hose slowly. Now we'll pause out here with this still open. Make our way into the passenger compartment with a pry bar and gently press up against that brake pedal as far down to the floor and rest that pry bar up against the seat, holding it in that position. Now once you're holding it to the floor, you should find that the fluid stops coming out of the caliper. We'll close this off. Moving along, we're going to remove our 14mm headed banjo bolt. This is the bolt that holds the flex hose to the caliper. When removing this, keep in mind there will be fluid inside of the caliper, so you want to have a collection receptacle under here so you can recycle that fluid properly. Inspect the banjo bolt. We'll set this aside. Now we'll take hold of the flex hose. You need to pay close attention to this. Commonly, you're going to find that you have a gasket that's stuck on both sides of this, especially if it's the original hardware. For this, I'm just going to use a small pocket screwdriver or pick to pull it out of place. Just grab onto the ear. A quick inspection of this, we'll set it aside for recycling. You never want to reuse your original gaskets. Now we'll set this flex hose aside so we cause no damage while we continue. Now we can move along to removing our 2 caliper slider mounting bolts. We'll be using a 14mm for each of these. Fully remove that bolt. A quick inspection. We'll start it back in just a couple threads. Make our way down to the bottom mounting bolt. Now we can carefully remove the caliper. You want to be careful for your brake pads. Commonly they can come out of the bracket while you continue. Drain out the caliper and set it aside. Move along to removing your 2 brake pad springs. You want to ensure that these are not rusted and rotted. These look good. Now we can remove each of our brake pads. As you remove these, you want to give them a close inspection. If it looks like they're worn low or at an angle, it's a good time to go ahead and replace them. These look fine, we'll set them aside. Now we can start removing the caliper bracket from the area. Looking along the backside, you'll find that you have two 17mm headed mounting bolts. You know what to do. We'll remove the upper bolt, a quick inspection, and start it back in just a couple threads. Fully remove the lower bolt. Remove your caliper bracket. And there it is, friend. Let's prepare our brand new caliper for installation. Have a look along the backside. We'll start by removing our banjo bolt and our two gaskets from this area. Set that aside. Continue on to your two 14mm headed slider bolts. We'll remove each of those and then pull the caliper off of the bracket. We'll use some high temperature caliper lubricant. Lubricate each of the two caliper pistons and the backside of each of these three ears. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now we can set this aside. Continuing on with the bracket itself, we're going to remove each of our two slider pins. Take hold of the pin and the boot and gently separate the two. Once you do have that removed, go ahead and remove the lubricant that's on the pin, a quick inspection, and re-lubricate it with your high temperature caliper lubricant. Make sure to coat the entire shaft area, and then also up inside the groove, closest to my gloved fingers. Once you have that lubricated, go ahead and reinstall the slider pin. We'll press that right in, squeeze out any air from in the boot there, and give it a little twist just to work in that grease. Repeat the process for your other slider pin. Continuing with the high temperature lubricant, let's make sure we lubricate the caliper bracket where our caliper tins will sit. We have two areas on each side of the bracket. The next thing we'll do is focus on our caliper bracket tins. What you'll find in your kit is it came with two different types of tins. Two of them will have ears that face off towards one side, and the other two will face off towards the other side. When installing your tins, you want to make sure you have them in the proper orientation so that those tabs are facing out and away from the rotor, not in towards the rotor. As we slide them into position, we'll just make sure they're secure as we continue. Over at the vehicle, we'll start installing the caliper bracket. Once you have that in place, we'll start in each of our two 17mm headed mounting bolts. With those started in, go ahead and snug them up. The torque for these is 77 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install our brake pads. When you install them, you want to make sure you have them in the same placement as where you had removed them, so the inboard pad remains on the inboard side. Once you do have them in place, give them a little wiggle. Make sure they can move freely. Now we can get these back in place. I want to slide them right into the brake pad holes here. Make sure you're holding onto the brake pads, otherwise they will expand away from the rotor and potentially fall out and get damaged. Now we can install the caliper over this area. We'll slide it over the brake pads, over the sliders, and install those slider bolts. For these slider bolts, you want to go ahead and start them in, snug them up. The torque for these is 20 foot-pounds. To reattach the flex hose to the caliper, we're going to take our brand new banjo bolt and one of our brand new gaskets. Go ahead and slide that gasket directly onto the banjo bolt. At this point, we'll be taking that banjo bolt and sliding it through the back side of the flex hose. On the opposite side of the flex hose, install your other gasket. Now we have a gasket on each side of the flex hose. We'll get this flex hose in position, pay attention to the locating tab that protrudes out, and align it with the corresponding hole on the caliper. Torque this to 22 foot-pounds. Let's make our way up here to the bleeder screw cover. At this point, we're going to start bleeding the brakes. The first thing we want to do is go ahead and remove that bar from in the passenger compartment. Now that we've installed the caliper, the next thing we need to do is bleed the brakes. When doing this, it's a good idea to have clean, brand new .3 brake fluid, and it's also a good idea to bleed all the brakes. If you're not planning on bleeding all the brakes, you need to at least bleed this one caliper. Otherwise, make your way to the right rear to start the bleeding sequence. Let's open this up. Got our fluid coming out. Go ahead and pump the brake pedal, please. Go ahead and pump. Go ahead and pump, please. Just make sure there's no air in there. Let's clean our mess. Get that cover on there. One last quick inspection inside this area to confirm everything's torqued and bled properly, and we can continue on with installing our wheel. Once you have each of your lug nuts started on, go ahead and snug them up. We'll get the wheel back on the ground and torque each of these to 76 foot-pounds. The wheel back on the ground, torque each one of your lug nuts in a crisscross manner. Torqued.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.